What's happening, guys and girls? Acrinator here, and holy actual fuck, it's good to be back. For those of you that don't follow me on Instagram, you may not have realized anything happened, but my computer recently decided to utterly shit the bed. After about 6 days and $600 worth of new parts, I have finally gotten back up and running again, for the most part, but more on that after the video. Anyways, welcome to another episode of World of Warcraft Dungeon Overview. This episode will be continuing on through the Cataclysm dungeons, specifically going through the only Deep Home instance, Stonecore. I'll be guiding you through it with my Demon Hunter you see here, so with that being said, let's dive straight into it. In the time between the banishment of Deathwing to Deep Home after the War of the Ancients and his return during the Shattering, the former dragon aspect of Earth hid away within the caverns above the Temple of Earth. Twilight's hammer cultists toiled away for years trying to repair the behemoth's broken body, allowing him to once again wreak havoc on Azeroth. It is unknown whether or not Therazane the Earth Mother knew of the Destroyer's presence within her realm, or even if she cared initially, though she most certainly would have if she had known the chaos the Mad Dragon would bring. Once he was whole enough to move around freely, Deathwing shattered the World Pillar, escaped into Azeroth, and caused the start of the Cataclysm. With their master now roaming above in the realm of mortals, it's unknown what the cultists within the Stonecore are doing with their time, but we can safely assume it's nothing good. We adventurers have been sent into Deep Home to repair the World Pillar and put an end to any further turmoil the Twilight's hammer might be causing the Earthen Elemental Lord. The Stonecore is a level 81 to 85 dungeon with a heroic mode located inside the central pillar of Deep Home. Unfortunately, this dungeon can't be reached without flying, so there is not much to say in that regard. Just walk out of the temple, take a right, and fly up to the platform with the instance portal. Easy peasy. As you can imagine, a dragon the size of Deathwing would have no trouble getting more simple-minded beasts to fall in line, including the crystalline worms inhabiting the Stonecore. The largest of this particular kind of elemental is known as Corborus, which was used primarily for digging up the Elementium ore that would later be refined into Deathwing's armor plates. Unfortunately, once its master left Deep Home, many of the creatures began rampaging throughout the caverns, killing anything and everything in their path. This, of course, includes Corborus, meaning that we'll have to deal with this overgrown fishing lure before we can take on the rest of the Twilight's hammer in the region. To ensure this fight starts, you'll want to make sure you're clearing out all the trash mobs on the way to the actual boss area. Specifically, you want to take out Millhouse Manastorm. After being cleared out, the gnome will continue to run down the path to the next group of mobs until he reaches the boss. Corborus will proceed to burst out from the wall, allowing you to actually start the encounter. To start off this fight, you'll want to take note of Crystal Barrage. On heroic difficulty, this will summon trash mobs that you'll really want to burst down before they can do anything. If they manage to reach any player, they'll explode, dealing a fair amount of damage, and increase the damage your whole party takes by 25%. And yes, this does stack. Corborus also casts Dampening Wave that gives each player a shield that absorbs healing until it's healed through. This can, of course, be a living nightmare for your healer if nothing is done, so be sure to avoid any major abilities for the next few seconds after this cast, and pop any self-heals you have to help burst down the shield. Lastly, the boss will occasionally burrow underground, emerging back up in predictable patterns, dealing a large amount of damage to anyone caught within its grasp. Rock borer trash mobs will also start to spawn while Burrow is active. These absolutely need to be focused down while they're up because they cause a nasty bleed effect that will stack if left alone. Considering the other mechanics for this fight, you really don't need to worry about even more incoming damage. So just focus on ad management and you should be able to survive this encounter. Deep Home is home to all earthen elemental beings, many of which are considerably more intelligent than your standard worm. As such, it took a more nuanced approach to sway the minds of beings such as the stone drakes inhabiting the crystal peaks of the realm of Earth. Thankfully for the old gods' forces, they could empower Deathwing's lingering powers as the aspect of Earth to bring these draconic beings into their ranks, giving them plenty of hardy warriors such as Slabhide to guard their operations from would-be intruders. After making your way through the smaller corridor and walking into the giant cavern where Slabhide is waiting, the Stone Drake will begin to call down stalactites from the cave ceiling to come down and crush players. You'll have to pay careful attention to the shadows on the ground for where these spikes will land. Once a member of your party makes it down to the main area, the spikes will stop falling and the boss will come down to greet you personally. The first thing to look out for in this fight is called Lava Fissure, where the ground will begin to crack underneath a random player. After a few seconds, lava will shoot up from the crack in heroic mode, obviously damaging anyone still standing in it. The tank should make sure to face Slabhide away from from the rest of the group to avoid the breath ability that damages everyone in a frontal cone of the boss. Just like the walk down here, more stalactites will begin to fall to the ground, with only shadows to give away their location of impact. Don't get flattened and you don't have to worry about anything. The last bit is that Slabhide will cast Crystal Storm, damaging all players in line of sight for a large portion of damage on heroic mode. The nice thing about this is that the stalactites will still be around at this point in the fight, and there's plenty of them to hide behind for the time being, so you shouldn't have any excuse for dying to this in particular. The Crystalline Giants are an ancient race that have served Therazane as guardians of Deepholm since the world was still young. Azrak is one such giant that was placed in charge of guarding the caverns where Deathwing would ultimately take refuge for millennia while recuperating from his injuries. It's unknown why he decided to betray the Earth Mother, but it's of little consequence now, because regardless, he's standing in our way. This fucker right here is probably the single most annoying boss in the entire expansion pack. He has multiple abilities that can just one-shot you if you make simple positioning mistakes, which wasn't fun back in the day when I was just learning how to do heroic dungeons. Personal vendettas aside, however, you'll want to clear out as much of the trash as possible before starting the boss fight, because trust me when I say you'll have enough things to worry about without even more aggro than you bargained for. The first bit you'll want to be conscious of is called a Ground Slam, where Ozruk will damage all players within 41 yards. Caster should be standing far back to begin with, and there's no consistent way to avoid this as a meleeer, so the healer will just have to be conscious of everyone within range for the time being. The tank will want to face the boss away from the rest of the group again, because he'll cast Rupture that causes 3 lines of spikes to jut out and knock up anyone caught in them. The massive amount of damage plus the fall damage is probably enough to one-shot most people, so make sure you don't get caught in this. Azrak has 2 shield abilities, one of which is called Elementium Bulwark, which reflects spells cast on him and can be dispelled. The other is called Elementium Spike Shield, which gives a small bleed effect to anyone who hits him for a short period. This does stack, but you'll only want to gain 1 stack. I'll explain why in a sec. The boss will periodically cast Shatter, instantly killing anyone caught within this circular attack by the time he's finished casting. Casters should already be well out of range for this, but meleeers will need to be wary and pop any speed cooldowns to get the hell out of dodge for this one. The trick with Shatter is that Azrak will cast Paralyze on everyone just before casting, stunning your entire party for long enough to effectively kill you. This effect can be dispelled from other party members, though it's unlikely that you'll have time. The best way to deal with this is to gain 1 stack of the bleed effects from Elementium Spike Shield, because any damage will unstun you, giving you enough time to escape. This fight will undoubtedly be the most difficult in the dungeon, and my only advice would be to pop absolutely every single cooldown you have to burst the ever-loving shit out of this guy in order to ensure that you don't have to deal with him or his bullshit abilities for any longer than necessary. Can you tell I still have a grudge against him? Little is known about Azil other than the fact that she is one of a very few members of the Twilight's Hammer that has survived communing with the old gods themselves. She didn't come out of the ordeal unscathed, however, as her mind was partially shattered, making it all the more difficult to discern between fact and fiction in regards to her backstory. What we do know is that she's feared greatly by her subjects, and is strong enough to survive an encounter with some of the most dangerous beings in the entire universe. There is going to be a large pack of trash mobs in front of the boss, though they're honestly so weak that you could easily just start the fight and AoE them down without worrying about too much. Azil has 2 distinct phases to her fight, which she'll continually cycle through as time goes on. The first phase involves fighting a few basic mechanics that are relatively easy to avoid once you know the tricks to them, the first of which is called Force Grip, which will fling a random unlucky player through the air and damage them for a good amount. Luckily, this can be interrupted, so please do so. Azil will also cause a gravity well to spawn at a random player's location, which will damage anyone besides the boss that steps in it. The easiest way to avoid these is to kite the small trash mobs into them, since they shrink after someone dies inside of them. It saves you the effort and cleans up the boss area a bit. When the second phase starts, Azil will cast a shield on herself, decreasing the damage she takes by 75%, and floating back up to her altar. More cultist trash mobs will continuously spawn in, though they never really become a threat at any point if I'm being honest. The main thing to worry about for this phase is that the boss will literally hurl giant boulders at you, dealing lethal damage to everyone it hits. You can attempt to kite the trash mobs into these, though it's kinda risky. I'd personally just recommend taking the safe route and avoiding the impacts altogether. The boss really isn't difficult besides these simple positional abilities, so just take your time and don't mess up. Well, I hope you all enjoyed this episode, and if you did, feel free to give it a thumbs up. If you want to see more like it, maybe even subscribe. Links to my social media and whatnot are in the description below, and on that note, if any of you did happen to wonder where I was the past week and didn't know where to look, my Instagram is the first place where I post those sort of updates. I try to keep my Discord up to date, usually with more details, but Instagram is almost always the first place for that sort of news. There was a very real possibility that my computer's replacement parts wouldn't have come in so fast, or that I could have screwed up the installation. Thankfully that didn't happen, but if it did, I probably would have had to delay this episode by a few days, at least until I got my bearings. Similarly, the podcast for July will be delayed a few days, so it will release in the first few days of August. There was just no way I could have done anything about that until just now, so all I can say in that regard is thank you for your patience. Getting back to the comment question, however, why do you think Osrock abandoned his post and decided to help the Twilight Hammer cult instead of defending the Stonecore from Deathwing's malevolence? The Elementals do have an ancient history of working with the old gods, though Therazane recently has shown to rather fight against them, so it's hard to say if there's any corruption that's either new or old in that regard. Could he have possibly feared what Deathwing might do to the Earth Mother had he not cooperated? I have a hard time saying anything for certain, but what do you think? Anyways, that's all the time I've got for today, so until next time, don't die.